Alrighty, we are on some part 48, I believe. I last checked, but in the last part we are looking at some of the history of Carthage and Western Africa, and we saw that some of these Persians and whatnot kind of blended in with some of these people that were in Northwest Africa, who were commonly called in those times the Gaetulians, and also the Numidians. So it said in the last video that they kind of blended in with them, just kind of assimilated themselves with those peoples. They said one of the reasons was because they weren't able to kind of, like I said, there was no possible, or it seems like the resources were so barren in those areas that like there was nothing to kind of like get effective resources from, it looks like. So there was no kind of like empire building, it looks like, as we've been reading this. And I mentioned that in the last video, kind of saying that, you know, these areas that they were around in the Mediterranean, it seemed like they were just either doing resource gathering like in Spain and had tons of resources for trading, or they were kind of I guess in small kind of like I don't know, like small bands, or I guess tribes, or little city states of themselves. Not really empire building. There seems to be like no sort of empire building in these regions. Not at least until later periods when there's more kind of reach from these bigger empires, and then kind of like get not absorbed necessarily, but just kind of like become vassal states, so to speak, and then you kind of get that own kind of national identity as the generations go down. So they say, you know, with all the kings and stuff like that, with all the history of what is past. But a lot of that gets obscured, and a lot of that gets infringed by just kind of over the generations, you know what I mean? Like you'll see, like, you know, some Spanish kings have like a different history than what actually happened, but that gets passed to us because, you know, like they always say, that the victor writes history. So we're gonna get started now, and we left off right here. So the country occupied by the Medes and Armenians bordered upon that of the Libyans, for they occupied parts of the near to the African Sea, whilst the Gaetulians were more towards the sun, not far from the Torrid zone. And they quickly built cities, for, separated from Spain only by straits, they established a mutual commerce. Their name was presently corrupted by the Libyans, who in their barbarous language called them Maori, Moors. Oh, okay. Instead of Medes. Huh. Okay. They called it so. Oh, no. Huh. That's an interesting thing. I don't think that's true about like the Maori people. I guess it could be true. I mean, like, that's what this book is suggesting. They didn't call them Medes, but called them Moors, and they're descendants of the Medes. But it seems, I don't know what time period. This doesn't really say what time period that this would have happened. I don't know, honestly. So I guess like they had part of like the northern regions of Africa. So these Persians had like the northern regions of like Africa, and then they were just called Moors, and then that got like passed down, I guess. I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure, but that's what this says. The affairs of the Persians in a short time became prosperous, and a colony under the name of Numidians left their original settlements on account of their numbers, and took possession of that part of the country which is next to Carthage and now called Numidia. Moreover, by mutual assistance they subjected their neighbors to their dominion, either by force or terror of their arms, acquiring great renown and glory. Those more particularly which border upon our seas, inasmuch as the Libyans are less warlike than the Gaetulians, till at length chief of the lower part of Africa was possessed by the Numidians, and all the conquered merged in the name and nation of the conquerors. Okay, so I guess these Gaetulian bands were kind of like able to kind of take over these resources and kind of stuff that was getting built there. So I guess that maybe explains why none of that stuff kind of expanded so much, is because there were these like kind of like there were these people there that would just like attack and like loot all the like kind of empire stuff. Because I mean, if okay, well that makes a lot of sense now. Okay, I see. I'm kind of, it kind of gives me like good imagery of like, well, how things kind of like came to be now, because I see that like, you know, these trade colonies, they needed to have a lot of like resources, like military arms to kind of protect these regions. So it costed a lot of resources, and I guess a lot of places couldn't do that. But I guess Spain was a really special area where it was pretty safe to like gather enough resources, and there weren't any type of like barbarian like kind of or barbaric tribes or any of these kind of like you know like just kind of I guess barbaric people. I don't know what else to say. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of like, were they really barbaric, or this is like the only side we're getting? You know what I mean? Like we don't know all too much, and this is what we seem to know about like what was going on in those lands. Because you look at these areas in history, and there's not much history said about these regions other than like these really like primary accounts here. Because this is like I wouldn't say this is from the horse's mouth, but this is like the best information that we can get about who these people were in these like lands where there's, I guess there was no empires of any sort that were recording like kings and stuff like that. It was only in the Near East you really saw that, and in Asia as well. Nothing of the sort. It's really interesting, you know, just kind of seeing things and seeing how it's all put together. So, where did we leave off? Yeah, right here. The Phoenicians afterwards sent forth colonies, some in order to dispose of the superfluous multitude at home, others from the ambition of extending their empire at the solicitations of the people, and those who were desirous of innovation, and founded the cities Hippo, Adramyttis, Leptis, and others upon the sea coast, which in a short time were raised to consequence, partly for defense to their parent states, and partly for their honor. Oh, okay, so that's all that's really said about Carthage and like all the history there, as early as you can get it from. Wow, okay. Okay, so these are Indian fragments from Megasthenes. So these are what, I guess what these Greeks and Romans would have said about those lands too. So this is all kind of like from a really Western perspective, because this was written about like 150 years ago, somewhere around there. Let's see here. Megasthenes, of the invasions of India. Megasthenes also appears to be of this opinion, informing us that no reliance can be placed upon the ancient histories of the Indians, For, says he, there never was an army sent forth by the Indians, nor did ever a foreign army invade and conquer that country except the expeditions of Hercules and Dionysus, and this of the Macedonians. Yet Sesostris and the Egyptian, and Terkon the Ethiopian, extended their conquest as far as Europe. But Nabonidus, the most renowned among the Chaldaeans, exceeded Hercules, and carried his arms as far as the pillars, to which also it is said Terkon arrived. But Nabonidus led his army from Spain to Thrace and Pontus. Idanthyrsus the Scythian also overran all Asia as far as Egypt. Is that Attila? We could look that up, but we'll just keep going. But none of all these ever invaded India. Semiramis died before she commenced the undertaking, but the Persians sent Hydrace to collect a tribute from India, and they never entered the country in a hostile manner, but only approached it. When Cyrus led his expedition against Massagetæ, Megasthenes, however, with some few others, gives credit to the narratives of the exploits of Hercules and Dionysus, but all other historians, among whom may be reckoned Eratosthenes, set them down as incredible and fabulous, and of the same stamp with the achievements of the heroes among the Greeks. Okay. It seems like nobody was ever able to just get into India, I guess. There was no way. I guess the Indus Valley was just too much for kind of expanding into those regions. It just wasn't worth it. It's just that whole area. Let's pull it up on the map so you guys know exactly where I'm talking about. So I pulled up the map and I already had it like open on the window. Kind of figured I should start using this a little bit more. So this is Persia. Okay, over here we have all the kingdoms that we've been talking about. There's Egypt, right? So we go a little bit more east. This whole passing right here is just like a bunch of rivers. Now, I don't know if we'll be able to see it or things are different today. I really don't know. Never been in these lands. I can only just see what I'm looking at on Google Images merely. So this is like the whole like Indus Valley, like mountains, and then this is all like a kind of like a plateau. This is like a flat land on a very high elevation. This is even a higher elevation right here. There's a bunch of rivers right here and a bunch of kingdoms and stuff like that that were like around here. But I guess there's too much to like kind of get, because I think that if we look at like, let's take a look at terrain. Yeah, there we go. Let's see, does it have like a scale? No. Yeah, topography of elevation. Yeah, see, okay, so if you look right here, this is the Zagros Mountains. This is kind of hard to move resources over there, especially in ancient times. And then over here, where they would have had like some control, like in these lands right here. But this was only like the Medes, and they only went westwards. But I guess for some reason they could never get around here because of it seems like this whole like joint right here is just too, it's too like blocked off. And you can't, I guess you really can't get around it because it's just all mountainous. So it seems like this whole passing right here was just too much for like any type of those empires to get to over here. And so it just, you had like a complete like cutoff of civilizations developing like right here and then right here, which is India, and it's all just like that. And then over here you just, you have all these people and all these people. Anywho, that's kind of like putting everything into perspective about how like they had no connection with India. It was really hard. And so, okay, so here's of the caste of India. Megasthenes says that the whole population of India is divided into 7 castes, among which that of the philosophers is held in estimation as the first, notwithstanding their number is the smallest. The people, when they sacrifice and prepare the feast of the dead in private, each makes use of the services of one of them. But the kings publicly gather them together in an assembly which is called the Great Synod, at which in the commencement of each new year, and let me read this footer real quick. Arianus also gives this fragment in his Indian history, but not so fully as Strabo. At which the commencement of each new year, all the philosophers assemble at the gate court of the king, that whatever each of them may have collected, which may be of service, or may have observed relative to the increase of the fruits and animals and of the state, he may produce it in public. And it is a law that if any among them be 3 times convicted of falsehood, he shall be doomed to silence during life. But the upright they release from tax and tribute. Okay. It's just kind of like going over like kind of the laws and natures of all that stuff. And I don't really know too much about it, so this is kind of all like new for me to take in. The second division is the caste of the agriculturists, who are the most numerous and worthy. They pursue their occupation free from military duties and fear, neither concerning themselves with civil nor public nor any other business. And it often happens that at the same time and place the military class is arrayed and engaged with an enemy, whilst the agricultural, depending on the other for protection, plow and dig without any kind of danger. And since the land is held of the king, they cultivate upon hire, paying a rent 1/4 of the produce. The third caste is that of the shepherds and hunters, whose sole occupation is hunting, grazing, and selling cattle, for which they give a premium and stipend. For clearing the land also of wild beasts and birds which destroy the grain, they are entitled to a portion of corn from the king, and leading a wandering life, living in tents. After the hunters and shepherds, the fourth race is that of the artisans and innholders, and bodily laborers of all kinds, of some whom, being tribute, or instead of it, perform stated service on the public works. But the manufacturers of arms and builders of ships are entitled to pay and sustenance from the king, for they work only for him. The keeper of the military store gives the arms out to the soldiers, and the governor of the ships lets them out for hire to the sailors and merchants. The fifth caste is the military, whom, when disengaged, spend the rest of their time at ease in stations properly provided by the king, in order that whatever occasion shall require, they may be ready to march forth directly, carrying with them nothing else than their bodies. The sixth are the inspectors, whose business it is to pry into all matters that are carried on and report them privately to the king. Okay, let me read this for you real quick. The narration of Megasthenes is then interrupted to introduce several particulars relative to the natural history of India. Well, they like omitted the natural history? Huh. I don't know what that means. Okay, well, for which purpose in the towns they employ women upon the town, and the camp followers in the camp. They are chosen from the most upright and honorable men. The seventh class are the counselors and assessors of the king, by whom the government and laws and administration are conducted. It is unlawful either to contract marriages from other castes, or to change one profession or occupation for another, or for one man to undertake more than one, unless the person is doing shall be one of the philosophers, which is permitted on account of their dignity. Of the governors, some preside over the rural affairs, others over the civil, others again over the military. To the first class is entrusted the inspection of the rivers and the and measurements of the fields after the inundations as in Egypt, and the covered aqueducts by which the water is distributed into channels. And then okay, I don't know what this is. This text looks like small. It's like some sort of footer or something like that. It is only permitted to them that a man may become a sophist for any caste, inasmuch as the way of life of the sophist is not agreeable, but of all others the most severe. A sophist? I guess somebody who's like just into like understanding knowledge, or maybe just history about this world. I don't really know what a sophist is. I'd have to like look that up. I actually don't know what that is and what he means in that context. Okay, so more down here. For the equal supply of all according to their wants, the same have the care of the hunters, with the power of dispensing rewards and punishments according to their deserts. They collect also the tribute and inspect all the arts which are exercised upon the land, as of wrights and carpenters and the workers of brass and other metals. They also construct the highways, and at every 10 stadia place a milestone to point out the turnings and distances. The governors of cities are divided into 6 pentats, some of whom overlook the operative works, and others have charge of all aliens, distributing to them an allowance, and taking cognizance of their lives that they give them in habitations. Else they send them away and take care of the goods of such as happen to die or are unwell, and bury them when dead. The third class take registers of the birth and deaths, and how and when they take place, and this for the sake of the tribute, that no births either of good or evil, nor any deaths may be unnoticed. The fourth has the care of the tavern keepers and exchanges. These have charge also the measures and qualities of the goods, that they may be sold according to their proper standards. Nor is any one permitted to barter more, unless he pay a double tribute. The fifth class presides over the manufactured articles, arranging them and separating the stamp from the common and the old from the new, and laying a fine upon those who mix them. The sixth and the last exact the tithe of all things sold, with the power of inflicting death on all such as cheat. Each therefore has private duties, but it is the public business of them all to control the private as well as the civil affairs of the nation, and to inspect the repairs of the public works, and prices, and markets, and the ports and temples. After the civil governors, there is a third college which presides over military affairs, and this in like manner is divided into 6 pentats, of which the first is consociated with the governor of the fleet, the second with him who presides over the yokes of oxen by which the instruments are conveyed, and the food for themselves and the oxen, and the other baggage of the army. They have with them moreover attendants who play upon drums and bells, together with the grooms and smiths and their under workmen, and they send forth their forgers to the sounds of bells, recompensing their speed with honor or punishment, and attending to their safety. The third class have the charge of the infantry, the fourth of the cavalry, the fifth of the chariots, the sixth of the elephants. Moreover, there are royal stables for the horses and beasts, and a royal arsenal in which the soldier deposits his accoutrements when he has done with them, and gives up his horse to the masters of the horse, and the same respect to his beasts. They ride without bridles. The oxen draw the chariots along the roads, while the horses are led in halters, that their legs may not be injured, nor their spirit impaired by the draught of the chariots. In addition to the charioteer, each chariot contains 2 riders, but in the equipment of an elephant its conductor is the fourth, there being 3 bowmen also upon it. Well, that's cool. Well, interesting to say the least. The Indians are frugal in their diet, more particularly in the camp. As they use no superfluities, they generally attire themselves with elegance. The relation of Strabo is continued with an account of the laws and customs of the Indians, containing some extracts from Megasthenes relative to the antiquities. And there's pi and some other Greek words. Okay. So, of the philosophers, that is much more worthy of credit which Megasthenes reports that the rivers roll down crystals of gold, and that a tribute is collected from thence for the king. For this also takes place in Iberia. And speaking of the philosophers, he says that those who inhabit the mountains are votaries of Dionysus, and point out traces of him among them, inasmuch as with them alone the vine grows naturally wild, as well as the ivy, the laurel, the myrtle, and the box, and the other species of evergreens, of which beyond the Euphrates there are none except such as are kept as rarities in gardens and preserved with great care. The following are also customs of Dionysic origin, to wear linen tunics and turbans, and to use oils and perfumes, and to precede their kings with bells and drums when he goes forth upon a journey. The inhabitants of the plain, however, are addicted to the worship of Hercules. Of the philosophical sects, he makes also another division of the philosophers, saying that there are two races of them, one of which he calls the Brahmanes and the Hermanes. Of these Brahmins are the more excellent, inasmuch as their discipline is preferable. For as soon as they are convinced, they are committed to the charge of men skilled in magic arts, who approach under the pretense of singing incantations for the well-doing both of the mother and the child, though in reality to give certain wise directions and admonitions, and the mothers that willingly pay attention to them are supposed to be more fortunate in the birth. After birth, they pass from the care of one master to that of another, as their increasing age requires the more superior. The philosophers pass their time in the grove of moderate circumference, which lies in front of the city, living frugally and lying upon couches of leaves and skins. They abstain also from animal food and intercourse with the females, intent upon serious discourses and communicating them to such as wish. But it is considered improper for the auditor either to speak or to exhibit any other sign of impatience. For in case he should, he is cast out of the assembly for that day as incontinent. After passing 37 years in this manner, they betake themselves to their own possessions, where they live more freely and unrestrained. They then assume the linen tunic, and wear gold in moderation upon their hands and in their ears. And they eat also flesh except of that of animals which are serviceable to mankind, but they nevertheless abstain from acids and condiments. They use polygamy for the sake of large families, for they think that many wives a larger progeny will proceed. If they have no servants, their place is supplied by the service of their own children. For the more nearly any person is related to another, the more is he bound to attend to his wants. The Brahmins do not suffer their wives to attend their philosophical discourses, lest if they should be imprudent, they might divulge in any other secret doctrines to the uninitiated. And if they be of a serious turn of mind, lest they should desert them, for no one who despises pleasure and pain, even to contempt of life and death, as a person of such sentiments as they profess ought to be, would voluntarily submit to be under the domination of another. They have various opinions upon the nature of death, for they regard the present life merely as the conception of persons presently to be born, and death as the birth into a life of reality and happiness to those who rightly philosophize. Upon this account they are studiously careful in preparing for death. They hold that there is neither good nor evil in the accidents which take place among men. Nor would men, if they rightly regarded them as merely visionary delusions, either grieve or rejoice at them. They therefore neither distress themselves nor exhibit any signs of joy at their occurrence. Their speculations upon nature, he says, are in some respects childish, that they are better philosophers in their deeds than in other words, inasmuch as they believe many things contained in their mythologies. However, they hold several of the same doctrines which they are current among the Greeks, such as that is the world that is generated and destructible and of spherical figure, and that the God who administers and forms it pervades it throughout its whole extent, that the principles of all things are different. Water, for instance, is the first principle of the fabrication of the world, that after the four elements there is a fifth nature, of which the heaven and stars are composed, that the earth is situated in the center of the whole. They add much of the like nature concerning generation and the soul. They have also convinced many fanciful speculations after the manner of Plato, in which they maintain the immortality of the soul and the judgments of Hades, and doctrines of a similar description, such as his account of the Brahmins. Of the Hermens he say they are considered the most honorable, who are called Helobi, and live in the woods upon leaves and wild fruits, clothing themselves with the bark of trees, and abstaining from venery and wine. They hold communication by messengers with the kings who inquire of them concerning the causes of things, and by their means the kings serve and worship the deity. After the Helobi, the second in estimation are the physicians, philosophers, who are conservant with men, simple in their habits, but not exposing themselves to a life abroad, living upon rice and grain, which everyone to whom they apply freely gives them and receives them into his house, and they are able by use of medicines to render women fruitful and productive, either of males or females, but they perform cures rather by attention to diet than use of medicines. Of medicines they approve more commonly unguents and plasters, for all they consider not free from deleterious effects. These and some others of this sect so exercise their patience in labors and trials as to have attained the capability of standing in one person unmoved for a whole day. There are others also who pretend to divination and enchantments, and are skillful in the concerns of the inhabitants and of their laws. They lead a mendicant life among the villages and towns, but better class settled in the cities. They do not reject such of the mythological stories concerning Hades as appear to them favorable to virtue and piety. Women are suffered to philosophize with some of these sects, though they are required to abstain from venery. Of the Indian suicides, Megasthenes in his account of the philosopher says there is no prescribed rule for putting an end to themselves, but that those who do it are esteemed rash. The hardy by nature cast themselves upon the sword or from a precipice. Those who are incapable of labor into the sea, and those who are patient of hardships are strangled, while those of a fiery temperament are thrust into the fire, which last indeed was the fate of the Calanus, an intemperate man, and addicted to the pleasures of the table at the court of Alexander. Philosophers from Clitarchus, according to, well, actually, you know what, maybe I should stop here. I know I've just been kind of like passively reading all this, but I mean, most of this stuff is just kind of hearsay and just kind of like I mean, I guess kind of it's kind of important details tradition, but when it comes to like some of the kind of like more like when they're talking about like the gold like kind of like that they put on their hands and ears, like that is kind of like the detail I'm paying attention to. Most of this stuff is kind of like I wouldn't say folklore, but it's just kind of like representing how different cultures can be, I think, more so. And that's kind of it's important, but not really for the premise of what I'm looking for, which is like history that we can kind of like put together. And because of things being so obscured the way they are, it's important to kind of like look at things that have a very more like ancient or kind of primeval or primitive connection to all of it. So we'll leave off right here of the philosophers from Carthaginian. I was about to read it, but we'll just follow it up in the next video.